It's about getting on for past, so if you could take yourselves away from Jacob's bookstore and
Well, I mean, important stuff, isn't it?
I'll just put one row out next time if you feel that too angry. Well, actually, the difference is to sit and listen to should we put chair? Jacob, there's lots of empty seats on the front row.
Yes, you do.
Kettle. Oh, right, okay.
But we were just saying, Chris, there's plenty of seats at the front. Well, welcome back, everybody, and well done for getting through the snow, or the ice, I think it is, more around our way. Perhaps we should start in prayer. Heavenly Father, as we continue to observe this season of Lent, and as we give up certain things, keep us mindful of those who have nothing to give up, those who are destitute, and particularly those who will be sleeping on our streets tonight, those who will be going to bed hungry, those who daren't put their heating on for fear of not being able to pay the bills. We ask that what we hear tonight would enlarge our vision of you and your work in the world. And we ask this in the name of your Son. Amen. Amen. Right, well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Andrew here tonight. I met Andrew because he was lectured in Christian ethics, or still does, on St Hilde as it's now called, but at YMC. When I was on it, definitely one of the best lecturers I had. And since we both lived over this way and travelled together, I got to know him quite well as well and heard all about his work. So I've written down what he sent me. So, well, he's a lecturer in Christian ethics. He's also researching for a PhD the relationship between theology and poverty at Durham University. And he is facilitator to the Leeds Poverty Truth Commission. I think he's going to talk to us something about that tonight. So welcome, Andrew.
Well, good evening. I realise you're only clapping to warm your hands up, and that is totally understandable. Yeah, it's good to be here. I actually just walked up the hill, because technically I am a parishioner, having moved. I think it's Whitkirk, isn't it, that I actually live in, on Carter Terrace down the road. I don't know why I told you my address, because you might want to come round and throw stones through the windows, but so we moved there about a year ago. I am originally from Sheffield, and so my phone is on and may vibrate every time Sheffield Wednesday score a goal this evening against Swansea, and then moved to London when I was an 18-year-old. And then about 12 years ago, myself and my family moved up to Leeds, and we moved into East End Park to live, obviously about 3 miles in that direction. Now, I'll never forget telling my mum that we were moving to Leeds. You know, we've been living in southwest London, 3.5 hours away. Her grandchildren she saw every now and again, and we were going to be half an hour away. And her response was, why Leeds? Because the only thing that draws Sheffield Wednesday fans and Sheffield United fans together is the song We Hate Leeds. So it's been a kind of interesting journey being in this particular city. I want us to think a little bit tonight about poverty, which is obviously a great conversation to have on a cold Tuesday evening in a church hall. And I really want us to think about particularly something that we talk about quite often in church. There's a passage in Proverbs that says, "Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all who are vulnerable. Speak out in order to judge with righteousness and to defend the needy and the poor." So right within kind of our wisdom literature, there is this call to speak out on behalf of the poor. Often we kind of narrow that passage down to being a voice for the voiceless. And tonight I want us just to consider 4 steps about what it might mean for us as God's people to be a voice for the voiceless. As I said, I moved to Eastern Park 12 years ago. My background is I was born and bred Salvation Army. You know, kind of like at my birth, a trombone was thrust into my hands, and my first baby girl was actually a uniform with a cap. You know, there's the kind of, I was born into the Salvation Army, and I was heavily involved in a movement within the Salvation Army that was seeking to help the Salvation Army really understand what it meant to be in the 20th century, which wasn't bad when it was the 1990s and everybody else was preparing for the 21st. And one of the things that is kind of really deep within the DNA of the Salvation Army is this kind of call to be alongside people who experience poverty. And I had a number of different experiences through my early life of engaging in different places, from the kind of favelas, the shantytowns of Brazil, through to a really strange estate called Thamesmead in south-east London. And I kind of knew that the kind of call to be alongside people who experience poverty was really strong for myself and for my wife. And in truth, that in some ways the reason why we ended up moving into Eastern Park, to kind of engage in that area. And we moved up as a family, so me and the 3 kids and my wife, another family moved up and another guy, and we just kind of hung out in that neighbourhood. Because we realised that if we come and started telling people how to live their lives, moving up from London might mean that the response will be fairly short. And the second word may be the opposite of on. So we kind of realised that actually listening and supporting and engaging with people where they were at was kind of really important. And in the context of that, what we started to do was to hear lots of wisdom. Lots of wisdom from people right across the board. Wisdom about what it means to be a parent. We'd been in Eastern Park about 10 months, and I came home from work, and we lived on an end terrace. So you walked in the door and the stairs went up. As I walked in, my ginger-haired Duracell battery of a son went flying past me and up the stairs. And he was playing, hide and seek with his sister. And I kind of went through and started talking to Mags, you know, about the day and having a chat. About 20 minutes later, we're like, where's Isaac gone? Because Macy's given up playing hide and seek a long time ago. So what's happened to Isaac? So I decided to go upstairs to see if I can find him. So I went in his room, and he wasn't there. I went in the girls' room, and he wasn't there. I went in our bedroom, he wasn't there. I even went into the bathroom, which no self-respecting 7-year-old boy ever visits, and he wasn't in there. So I thought, oh, maybe he didn't go upstairs, and he went outside. So I went outside and had a little run around, and I kind of couldn't see him around the backyard. Thought he might have gone up to the little rake at the top of the road, so I went up to the rake, it was not there. And then you start to begin to panic. So I rang our friends who'd moved up with us to see if he'd gone to their house, because at that stage that was the only house that he probably would go to and knew well enough to kind of go into, and they'd not seen him. Well, to cut a very long story short, within 10 minutes there were lots of people looking for Isaac, because I'd gone around shouting about it, and my friend down the road had got on his bike, a guy called Anthony, got on his bike and gone flying around the estate trying to find Isaac, encouraging anybody he saw to get involved. The police were then called, and it's a horrible moment, because in a moment, if you've ever lost a child, you suddenly sort of can see yourself on the 9 o'clock news, you know, with all the microphones in front of you kind of pleading for your child. And my head's going everywhere and I'm running around, and I remember this guy who was definitely worse for wear saying, "Have you seen the little ginger-haired lad?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's my son, we're looking for him." Anyway, I ran past a car, and as I went past the car, I heard over the radio the phrase, "Stand down, we found him." So I said to the policeman, "What should I do?" I'm his dad. He said, "Just go home, he's at home." So I went home. Went into the front room, and there's Isaac's there with my wife and the girls and this police officer. And I said to the police officer, I said, "Where was he?" You know when you open a door in a bedroom, and behind the bed door is like a chest of drawers. You know how it creates that little triangle? Isaac was asleep in that triangle. And when I'd gone up, I hadn't obviously looked behind the door, because you don't. And he was quite shocked when the police officer lady went up and said, "What are you doing?" And that was where he was. So we managed, for our first mission experience in Easton Park, to get people looking for our lost child who was lost in his own bedroom. Wasn't the most auspicious start. I remember walking down the street to Anthony's house, because I felt I needed to go and say sorry. So I knocked on the door, he opened the door, and I went, "Anthony, I am so sorry, we are so stupid." And he looked at me and said, "Andrew," he said, "when a kid goes missing around here, we all get out, because we all look out for our kids and each other's kids." And I learned something in that moment that was really important. That actually we can look at that kind of place, and I looked at East End Park thinking I was going to come and bring hospitality and bring, you know, a different way of looking at things to that place, but actually it was already there. And East End Park taught us more than we ever taught it. One of the things about the wisdom that we discovered was that it came in all shapes and forms, from people from Ireland originally through to people from Eritrea, and we started to learn about how to be more human actually through their experiences and their wisdom. And we also heard things that were really important about the neighbourhood. And we started to realise that local people actually understood ways in which the neighbourhood might be better. But it was really weird, because the listening places where you were supposed to listen the most, they didn't seem to be able to share this wisdom. This lady here is called Mary. Mary is, and always was, when I first met Mary, I looked at her and she said something and I thought, she's my conscience. Anything I do in this neighbourhood, if I can look at Mary and go, I did it with all the best intentions, even though the results are catastrophic. If I could look at Mary, then that was fine. She would, you know those people that you need in your life who will just tell you straight. Mary is one of those, and she had remarkable wisdom and understanding of how neighbourhoods operated and how to make do with little and how to build community. But whenever Mary got into a meeting like this, set up ironically almost exactly the same with the council. The difference being is that the council will be sat behind a desk, which I soon realised was a kind of barricade. And whenever that wisdom was in the room, it turned into a bun fight, where people would just start blaming one another rather than actually really listening to one another. I don't know what you know about Leeds, but Leeds is one of the most unequal cities in the country. Only places like Bristol and Newcastle kind of rival it for the real breadth, lots of wealth, but also quite a lot of poverty, or to use the horrible word, deprivation, which is the word that the government use. Massive inequality. And I started to think, what if we got that wisdom from these local people who actually knew something about this stuff into a room with the people that make decisions in the city, and they started to learn from one another? Would Leeds start to become a different place? At this time, I heard about the Scottish Poverty Truth Commission. And I was in a meeting, and my friend who'd been involved in facilitating it and starting it, a Church of Scotland minister, gave me the report of the first one, which was this little purple kind of brochure, about 16 pages. And as I flicked through, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Because it started with people who had direct experience. It started with them talking about their experiences. And they talked about them to, like, important people within Scottish culture, including people like the Deputy First Minister for Scotland and the head of the police force in Strathclyde. All these really important people were in the room. And it wasn't that they kind of told their stories like they were some kind of museum piece or some kind of zoo, and did their stuff and then got wheeled off. They stayed in the room, and they built relationships with one another over quite a long period to kind of understand the dimensions of poverty and understand what it was going on about, and what was really going on. And there were some really great moments that it talked about in this brochure. One was the day that the head of Strathclyde Police said, they were talking about the relationship between domestic violence and poverty. And he said, this is what you should do if you hear domestic violence in your street. And this lady sat there and went, oh, that's very interesting. She said, yeah. He said, so let me get it right. This is the process that I should go off. And then what happens when we get to that? Oh, the police will come round. He said, oh, that's really, really interesting. Because last night, it was kicking off next door, I followed your process, and the police still haven't turned up. The next meeting, the head of the Violence Reduction Unit was brought in by the head of Strathclyde Police to have a conversation, and they reworked how the police would work in that situation with the wisdom of people in the room. Things like that got me thinking, what if we did that in Leeds? What might that look like? How would it not just be step one of listening to people with direct experience, but what would it be if we got step two, other people to listen, people who really can make decisions? And 4 years ago, we launched the very first Poverty Truth Commission in Leeds. We've just literally in the last month finished our second one. Hopefully this will work. But here's a bit of a video that will kind of just show you exactly what it looks like. I said hopefully.
The what, why, who and how of the initiative. The Poverty Truth Commission starts with a question. What if the people who have directly faced poverty were involved in decisions about poverty. This question comes from the belief that no lasting social change happens without the people who suffer under the status quo taking a lead in bringing about a change to that status quo. A principle that can be seen throughout the history of social change, from suffragettes to civil rights. And the status quo in Leeds is one of massive inequality. The difference in educational achievement between one of the city's richest wards and one of its poorest is dramatic. Some wards have over 2/5 of their children being brought up in low-income families, while in others the figure is less than 1 in 20. And life expectancy is almost 11 years more in the city's richer wards compared to the poorer. But behind all these statistics are the lives of real people, and Leeds Poverty Truth Commission aims to give a face to the facts. So, we gather a group of experts through experience, who we call testifying commissioners. People with direct experience of poverty in its many forms. Together, this group of commissioners spend time sharing their stories and experiences with each other and consider who in the city might have influence to bring change. Civic and business leaders are then invited to join the Commission as co-commissioners. The Poverty Truth Commission is not about these civic and business leaders and their organisations providing the solutions, but about developing relationships of trust and empathy between commissioners and seeing what happens when their combined resources, experience and wisdom are brought together. The Commission recognises that there are experts and wisdom on all sides and seeks to unlock this wisdom through deep, generative listening that goes beyond merely communicating facts, beyond even the empathic listening of being able to see the world through another's eyes, but to a deep, creative level where together individuals can connect to something larger than themselves and open up and commit to new future possibilities. Over time, this leads to the emergence of issues and themes which, through a variety of ways, the Commissioners begin to explore and address together. Ultimately, the Poverty Truth Commission is about culture change, changing communities, organisations, and individuals' attitudes towards poverty and how to tackle it, and asking, how as a city do we deal with poverty where all have a responsibility and part to play? Leeds Poverty Truth Commission is an attempt to give a face to the facts of poverty and create change with the maxim that nothing about us, without us, is for us. Find out more at leedspovertytruth.org.uk or by following us on Twitter and Facebook.
Hopefully that gives you a bit of a kind of understanding of the basic overview. Kind of the commissions last for about 2 years and involve a lot of talking with one another and learning together and kind of we've seen some quite remarkable things happen in the lives of different people. It was briefly kind of touched upon there, but as we're thinking about listening, there's a little bit of theory that I just want to kind of share with you. There's a guy in the States called Otto Scharmer, and he says that there are 4 levels of listening. The first level is where you download. Now, in this level, what you do is you listen for the things that you want to hear. And you kind of sit there almost with a mental, oh, I like that, yeah, tick. I like that, tick. And I guess what we wanted to do with the commission was to try to push it a bit further than that. We didn't want the council coming in and going, oh yes, they're saying what we know already, and they're saying we're doing a good job, and they're saying that. We wanted them to hear some of that, but we didn't want them to think that that was the whole picture, and that they needed to listen a little bit more deeply. So Sharma says, you get beyond that download to what he calls factual. Now, factual isn't about learning the facts. It's actually about hearing stuff that makes you go, oh, really? It's making you kind of go, oh, I didn't quite understand that, or I didn't quite know that. So, let me tell you a bit of a story about one of the people this time. A lady called Maria. Maria is now 67. She went to university. She had quite an important job, actually, in the public sector. She was married. They adopted 2 children, and then one day her husband falls down dead. And because of the way things were, she within weeks found herself in poverty. Maria is a very articulate lady, very bright, very clever. And about 2 years ago it would have been now, when we just started working on the second commission and she was getting involved, she brought a letter to us. The letter was 16 pages long, and it was from the council. And it explained some of the changes that she was going on as she transitioned into pensionable age around things like housing benefit. And she was just like, I do not understand this. I have a university degree and it goes on for 16 pages. What am I meant to do with this? So at our opening meeting, when in the room was a really lovely guy called Lee, who is head of customer services for Leeds City Council, and he joined the commission. The first kind of time that he walked into the room, they do a little bit of a presentation. And Maria shares about this letter and produces the letter and gives it to Lee because it's Lee's name on the bottom of the letter. And he read through it and he went, you know what? I don't understand it myself. That kind of moment of, oh, I thought we were doing this right. And they probably were doing it right because it probably covered them. But actually, Lee sat out and thought, what are we going to do about that? Sharma pushes it further. And he says that actually we need to go beyond that moment and actually connect with the person. Kind of empathic. To kind of feel and imagine ourselves in the other person's shoes. Let me just introduce you to Jeff. Jeff's story is one that's just normal in some ways. But actually, as he has met some of the civic and business commissioners, they've started to build relationships together and see each other as people, not just statistics. I remember in the first commission there was one particular small group session that we were having, and Anna turned up, and she that morning had been through the post given a bill for £1,800. The story goes that 10 months prior she'd gone from being a self-employed Avon lady to a part-time cleaner, which, as far as everybody's concerned, is the right progression to be making. But unfortunately, the organisations that should have given her advice didn't give her the advice that she needed to fill in a particular couple of forms. And 10 months later, it had caught up, and she had a bill for £1,800. And sorry, 2 bills cumulatively to 1,800. In that room was a businessman. He was one of the first people responsible for all the development by the river down in the city. So he was somebody who had a lot about him, the kind of self-made entrepreneur, if you like. And Peter was just a remarkable guy, because he would often just put his head in his hands. And as Anna was telling this story of what had happened that morning, he put his head in his hands and he went, "No!" And Anna said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Anna, if I had to cope with what you've had to cope with, I'm not sure I'd still be here. Because it's just ridiculous." And there was real empathy. That same session, one of the other civic and business leaders was the guy that was head of revenues and benefits for Leeds City Council. And in that meeting, he was explaining some of the challenges that he had with the rules that were set somewhere 200 miles down south. And how they meant that sometimes he felt that he couldn't operate in a human way and respond with his heart. And Anna, this very same woman, who that morning had £1,800 that she needed to find, said, "Peter, I don't know how you do it. Because everything I've experienced from you is somebody who's doing it for the right reasons, because you care and because you want to make a difference." He said, "But you've got to struggle daily with rules that you disagree with." Empathy goes both ways. Empathy is about creating a space for relationship. One of my favourite writers at the moment is a lady called Simone Weil. And she talks about paying attention. Really paying attention. Listening to what is said, but also listening in the silences to what is unsaid. If ever there was a kind of Catholic way of looking at the world, it's that. To listen to that which we can speak, but also to listen to that with which we can't have the language for. That's the root of empathy. And in some ways, what Poverty Truth does around our notion of being a voice for the voiceless is it actually creates space for people to have relationships. I have been in a party in Chapeltown where one of the testifying commissioners has got her papers to stay in the UK, and one of the civic leaders at 9 o'clock at night turns up to party with them because that's her friend. On New Year's Day, Jamie Jones Buchanan, the Leeds Rhinos player who's been a commissioner this time, rings up James, who lives in Seacroft, and says, "My family want to meet you. Why don't you come over and let's play Pie Face together?" And they partied in that house because relationships are being made. But in some ways, we don't want it to stop there. Sharma says that you listen so much that you let the facts disturb you, you create empathy for the person and build relationship. But because of what you've heard, you have to do something. And you have to do something together to make a difference. You have to listen and take all the relationship you built and do something with it. And so what we start to see happen is organisations starting to do things differently. Let's go back to Lee and Maria. Maria with the letters. So Lee decides that one of the things that he'd like to do during Poverty Truth is pull a meeting together in the civic hall of all the frontline staff, or a number of the frontline staff, for Leeds City Council. So people that answer the phones when you ring up about your housing benefit, or people who are in the one-stop centres. And so he got a number in them, they sat round tables. And then he invited some of the people with direct experience to come as well. And he split them up and put one on each table. And then he said, what I want you to do is those who have experience of poverty, we'd like you to say, when you ring us up or when you speak to us, what don't you want to hear? And so they did. And then everybody listened and paid attention. And then he said, frontline staff, when somebody rings you up, when somebody turns up, what don't you want to hear? And do you know what they discovered? Same things. And so they started to say, how can we have different conversations? How can we as a city council start to deal with things in a different way? And Lee started a little thought, a germ of a thought, that day that said, actually, our frontline staff shouldn't be the first line of defence. There should be advocates for those who ring us and help and journey through with them. It's only a little thing, but it could make a massive difference, particularly to whether you're going to ring or not. And so bit by bit, things start to generate. One of the ladies works for Leeds City College, and she heard story after story about how poverty is related to isolation. And so she put on a wall, on a pin board or whatever, poverty is isolation. And for a couple of days, every time she'd look at it and think, what could I do? And then she thought, there will be lots of students in this college who are isolated because they can't get across the city. What if we as a college worked with First Bus to give them all a bus pass so that they can travel and meet and build relationships with one another? And so she has the plan to do that. So little bits start to develop. Voice for the voiceless. We started by saying it's about listening, then it's about getting others to listen. And it's about building relationships. And then step 4 is they act together. They do things together. But you might start to think, well, what's our role within this? But I moved to East End Park to put East End Park on the map. And to speak up and to be the person that went down to David Cameron or Tony Blair or whoever it was at the time and told them what they should be doing for my neighbourhood. Because I was to be the voice of the voiceless. But one of the things that I've realised through this whole thing is that when it comes to issues like poverty, when it comes to a whole range of things, we can assume that people don't have voices. And we can speak on their behalf because we're the educated middle class. And I'm generalising here. You know, I've never been described as a lecturer before. I was scared, sat there. You know, it becomes our job. But actually, I think we have to slow down a little bit and pay attention. Listen to what people are saying, get alongside them, and enable them to discover their voice. And see Alison looking at her watch. So I'll finish with this. Oh, hang on. Let me show you this picture. This is Mary, my conscience. If you notice, she's in a church. She's leading prayers. But notice who's officiating behind her. Pope Francis. This is St. Peter's Church in Rome. Mary brings East End Park into the centre of Catholic faith and prays a prayer on behalf of people who experience poverty from all over the world in that place. 2 months earlier than that, she stood in the Queen Elizabeth Hall in Westminster, literally opposite the Palace of Westminster. And as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who have a lot of influence, as they led their and unveiled their anti-poverty strategy, Mary spoke. And because I timed it, she got the longest round of applause. And she said much better stuff than the professors and the lecturers, because she had lived it. Hopefully that puts a bit of a different spin on the voice for the voiceless. I'm sure there are more questions than answers. I've got a few copies. These, if you want to take them, you can take. This is what we've called our Hugh Manifesto. So the second Poverty Truth Commission decided that they wanted to call the city on about poverty, and that their big thing that they'd understood was that poverty dehumanises everybody. It dehumanises those who are administering the benefits as well as those that are going to receive them. It actually, theologically, dehumanises everybody who lives within this city. The fact that there is poverty within it. And so they kind of have written what things might change to help Leeds become a more human city. For those of you that like Panini football sticker albums, they're all there, including the bishop, who we asked to take his dog collar off because we wanted them all we wanted you to play the guessing game of who's a civic and business leader and who's not. So you can take that. We call it Hugh Manifesto rather than just a manifesto. But at a time of Lent, Hugh Manifesto seems to be almost on the money. Alison.
Thank you ever so much, Andrew. I have to say that I've heard some of that before, and it kind of was. You do say you have to hear things 5 times, don't you? It hit harder, I think, this time. I think, having had so much to take in, it might be an idea just to have a few minutes just to talk with the people around you, about anything that really hit home with you, or anything you'd like to ask Andrew, or anything like that. So just have a few minutes just to sort of maybe process a bit of that with each other. I'll risk this, and perhaps what happened last time, is you're all having these fascinating conversations and then nobody wants to share. But I don't know if anybody has anything. Ken?
Where do you meet, and how do you get onto the
We're having a break now because that commission's finished. Although this has really picked up people's interest. So definitely have one. We've got a what they call a deputation to the council, which is at the start of their full council meeting, the end of March, actually Holy Week, ironically, in March, where we will present the Hugh Manifesto. And so that week we're having a week of pledges, people pledging to kind of this is what we're going to do, and BBC are helping us with that, and Evening Post and all that kind of stuff. And then we will start in probably May time, beginning to go, okay, what next? How do we've got funding to do another round for the commission, but what do the current commissioners think we should do next, and then start to recruit from there.
So how do you, I presume with the council, you just kind of say, well, you guys work in these particular areas, so we'll have you. But how do you choose the people from the other side? How do you get the people who've got
With the experience?
on-the-ground experience?
Yeah. A number of different ways. Some are just people that we know because of relationship. We the first time went to all the voluntary sector organisations and asked all their heads, who do you know? And that was a right old waste of time. I tell you where the people come from. They come from really small grassroots groups in places like Seacroft, and they come from church organisations and faith groups, because they're the people that actually know people. And what we try to do, in those neighbourhoods, there are always those people that always turn up and always get involved, and that's wonderful. But we try to get beyond those, to people that don't often speak and don't often engage. And actually, we ask them, we listen to them, we have a cup of tea with them, listen to them, and we're looking for three things. One, a personal story to tell. So you're not there to tell somebody else's story, it's your story. Two, a willingness to be able to tell that in public, because That, you know, like Jeff's video, that's public. You know, so they need to be willing to do that. And thirdly, recognition that their story is something that is shared by other people, as in other people experiencing something similar. Now, what we're not doing is saying you become the representative of that particular kind of poverty, because that will be dangerous. But we're saying that they, and in some ways, it's trying to say you've got a bit of analysis. There's a theologian in the States called Ched Myers, and he talks about you need anecdote, you need story, but you also need analysis. If you're going to change things, you need both. And so in some ways, that third question is to say, have they got that kind of brain that will be able to go, actually, yeah, I know this is connected in different ways.
I looked at the picture and they're not listening.
Hey, it's not my tradition.
Yeah, can I just do a quick one? I'm a research funeral director, many people know. And this is a few years ago, not centuries ago, probably centuries ago. And we were called out by the coroner's office to move a lady who had been found and was quite near the other city, not that far from where you were. And there was this poor lady. She was dirty, she was scruffy. There was very little about the house. It was this sort of weather. There was no heat on. There was practically no food that you could see about the place. And she died. And the way that people looked at poverty, when we actually took her to the coroner's mortuary, one of the things we had to do was address this lady. And then stitched into her own was 20 quid, which is about 50 quid. And that made her rainy day money, if you like. And people used to fall through the cracks like that. Now, hopefully, that's some of the things that you can prevent. But the things, which even though it's just part of the profession, stick with you forever.
Yeah, they do. Because it's personal. It becomes personal, doesn't it? Yeah. You know, the Jubilee 2000 thing, the Make Poverty History, you know, we did lots of stuff and it was great. I think we have to make poverty personal first. I think it has to have a personal edge to it. Not that we put ourselves in poverty like some kind of Franciscan friar, but actually that we realise this is about human to human rather than massive big structures.
So it's a very thin line, isn't it? Are you 2 clear packets away from poverty?
Yeah.
So you know, you don't know really what's around the corner.
Yeah.
And we're all comfortable relatively, and down the road there's that way there. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
thin line.
And all she might have needed was somebody to go and have a cup of tea. I remember friends of ours moved onto an estate in Oldham years ago now, and there were 19-year-old girls living in this house, and next door I line up, the lady was called Granny Smith, and they had cups of tea with Granny Smith regularly, and one day she said to them, look, I rang the council today, I'm going to have to move out, I just had enough, I can't cope with it anymore, yeah, I've lived there all my life, but I've asked them for a new house. They kept having cups of tea with her. 2 months later, they went round and she said, oh, I rang the council again today. And my friends were like, oh no, you know, she's going to tell us she's off because they got to like her. And she said the lady answered the phone and she got very defensive when I told her who I was. Because she said, oh, we're going to get onto it, we're getting onto it. And she said, well, don't bother, love. And the lady said, why? She said, because there's 2 girls next door. They come and have cups of tea with me, and now I feel loved, and so I want to stay. That's not changing financially the situation she was in, but humanly, it's giving her a reason to live, and a reason to feel safe and cared for. Does that make sense?
Numbers are very clean, and people aren't. So you can look at a number and say, this is poverty, or you need 2 paychecks before you're in poverty. It's meaningless. you actually see someone in that position, you get to know someone, you hear their story, it ceases to be a number, and it ceases
Absolutely.
to be, it makes it a harder decision from a government perspective, because in Westminster they do have to make tough decisions, and they, they've got X amount of tax and they have to divide that between everything, and everyone's shouting really loudly. But it's clinical because they just see the numbers. It's the personal side that actually makes you think, well, actually, where's the priority? How do we fix it?
Yeah, the problem is actually science. It's your fault. And maths, in that actually what we're looking for is universal answers to what are incredibly complex problems. We treat it a bit like a math puzzle and say, if we just work hard enough, we will get the formula right, because it's complicated. And complicated things mean, you just have to sit and think long and hard enough and work hard enough and you get it fixed. But poverty is complex. How people fall into it, how people, skirt around it, the factors are all very personal. And so actually universal decisions that we make that kind of go, everything's like that, is really problematic. Because and dehumanising, just by their very nature.
Trevor, did you?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by what you've told us tonight. I think some great stories came out of it. I think there's obviously very valuable work going on there. I just wonder how do you measure how successful the Poverty Commission has been? And is there any way that what you do learn from all the work that you do gets fed back up to central government so that maybe their policies could be influenced in some way?
Yeah, very good. And that is when we're writing our funding bids and all that kind of stuff, that's the hardest thing to get through. I mean, partly we can point to change lives. With that picture on, Mary's a different woman. And I would say for everybody who is being a person with experience who's told their story, been involved, they would say that they're different people for it. And, some are in employment now, some are at university now, some, lots of positives. I would also say that the vast majority of civic and business commissioners would also say their lives have changed.
Is that measured in any way, though? Can you put statistics to that? Because
you can't put statistics to it. You can't put statistics to it. But that's partly because we are driven by statistics. And what we have to do is change the narrative so that it is about the story. And the guys in Scotland who've been going for 10 years, the Fairest Scotland report that was published last year has two forwards, one from, the First Minister for Scotland, and another from the Poverty Truth Commission, because they've been seen as a credible way of engaging in those issues. When it comes to government, on our first commission, there was a lady from Joseph Rowntree, there was a commissioner, Emma, and she was so taken with it. She said to myself and Martin, the Scottish Church of Scotland guy, what would you want to do? And so we wrote this idea on the back of a bus ticket of helping people to start poverty truths around the country in the hope that you create a movement of people with direct experience of poverty that can speak to power. And tomorrow I will go to the closing event of one of the 10 commissions that there is now in the UK. And 3 weeks' time, a commissioner with direct experience from each of the commissions is coming together to say, what do we do more nationally? Because there are some things that you can only do in Whitehall. But the other thing that I'd want to say is poverty is everyone's problem. It's not just a government problem. And we can get obsessed with government on these issues. And one of our best commissioners been working for the Chamber, works for the Chamber of Commerce. And he's desperately trying to change. He's trying to say, don't just do little bits for people in Leeds. Actually, let's make some big changes and let's have this agenda right at the heart of it. So, does that help answer?
It does, yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Moses, and we want to finish.
Yes, I just wanted to say something. The people working in the front line and many people are in poverty. So even the frontline people will take call so many times for those people in the front line. As you mentioned, that was like really very clear for that one. Those people who work in the front line, if they treat them with a lovely way, even not like a defensive way, being a transparent, this is what we have, this is what we can do, in a lovely way. So that is like absolutely create a lovely way between the governments or maybe in the public sector. But some of them, they don't treat like that way. They do the indefensive way. That brings a treat as a dehumanizing.
Absolutely.
It's like,
Absolutely.
And they feel sad about that.
Yeah.
And then they turn up into homelessness or they,
Yeah. Yeah, and when Lee said about becoming advocates rather than first line of defence, I said the people that will appreciate that the most are the people that are working, because that's why they got their jobs in the first place, to help people. And I think one of the challenges is the different organisations that you have to interact with in terms of government organisations. Working with the front line of Leeds City Council is very different to working with the front line of a particular department within the government structure, where the agenda is quite different and quite challenging. And we're beginning to get a bit of an opportunity to work with that particular department. And again, it's happening because there are people in it going, we need to change. And so our working alongside will hopefully start to change some of that.
I suppose it's as well whether you treat poverty as a problem or an opportunity. Because if you treat it as a problem, this is a problem that needs solving, needs to go away, stop complaining about it.
Yeah.
As opposed to an opportunity for how do we improve things, how do we engage with people in our city. And if the council views it in that way rather than a problem, the people on the front line cease to be problem solvers and they become opportunists. Positive way. Negative word, but you know what I mean? They think that they're there to help rather than to solve.
And I mean, the poor we will always have with us. You know, that is a kind of, that, and the original text for that is not, all right, the poor are going to have with us, we'll just let it get on. It's one of the most radical passages in the Old Testament, which is about the year of Jubilee. You know, it's setting up the Sabbath of Sabbaths. Can I just share one thought before the end? I was in a meeting today, and in the next 6 months, what is called universal credit will be rolled out in Leeds. That will mean that there are families who will become homeless. That will happen as a direct result. We can't let that happen. That's wrong. And I was having this meeting today and I just thought, coming back to that idea of the Jubilee, what if the church and the reason why they'll become homeless is because they don't get their benefits for 6 weeks. There's a 6-week gap as it changes. So it's not the policy that's wrong, it's actually the implementation of the policy. And I want to make that clear. So it's this 6-week gap. What if the church in Leeds raised all the money necessary to cover that 6-week gap for everybody and just gave it as a gift so that kids don't have to go homeless? Actually, that's a jubilee. And that's something that's achievable. That's something that could be done. We've got the resources to do it. And if we do it, they did this in Fremantle in Australia about energy bills. As they did it, businesses got on board and started chucking money into it as well. Because it was like, wow! And we have the narrative that says that that's possible. We have the mandate. Jesus says, today this is fulfilled in my hearing. And the line that he says before that is, declare the year of the Lord's favour, the year of Jubilee. And so maybe that's something we could do.
What figure are you talking about?
I am waiting to hear. I think it would be the high tens of thousands.
So not astronomical then?
It's not. No, it's not actually. It's not like we're talking about £10 million.
No, right.
Yeah, I'm pie in the sky, but you know, I'm not that pie in the sky. I'm from Sheffield. I can't be that pie in the sky. But yeah,
somebody's got to be, haven't they?
Yeah, but we do, and it's our narrative.
Yeah.
It's our story.
Yeah.
Let's be faithful to it, and we can share it with people of other faiths because it's part of their story as well. Anyway,
Sadly,
sorry.
we're going to have to stop there, but thank you again. A brief pause while those leading confident scurry across and get ready up. Actually, scurrying's probably the best.
Hi, sir. How are you?